Must be something I did here. Sorry. Okay, so we talked about lift, and we were on the subject of lift. And weight always acts directly down towards the center of the Earth. I have Earth's surface, but if you want to say the really accurate way to say it is that it is directed down towards the center of the Earth. Everybody know the difference between mass and weight? You do? Everybody knows the difference, right? So if something has mass, it may not have weight, depending on where it is. If it's in space, it still has mass, but it doesn't have weight, because the weight is gravity acting on mass. The gravity, mass gives you weight. Okay. So thrust can be a power plant or a vector of gravity. And the reason I say vector of gravity is because that's how a glider flies. A glider flies by being dragged down by gravity, but not allowing it to go straight down. So it descends, as we talked about before. Gliders are always descending, and that descent gives them airspeed, and that airspeed gives you lift. So thank goodness for gravity, because gliders, when there is no lift, gliders can still fly some distance. Maybe not a lot of distance, but some distance. And drag is always directly opposite the aircraft path in the air. Anybody ever seen a 747 was on its approach to an airport? Okay. Approach is that it's with its nose high in the air. But that doesn't mean that's the path of that airplane. The path is down. But it's coming in like this because it had to tilt itself up to get maximum lift and the slowest speed. So Bernoulli's principle simply says that it increases as pressure decreases. And he talked about a venturi. A venturi is a pipe like this with a constriction in the middle. And as the air comes through, it speeds up to get through. And when it speeds up, the pressure decreases. So you have a decrease of pressure here, and you have an increase of pressure over here. Where that's important is not necessarily at Venturi. They use Venturis on older airplanes, like a Stinson or an old Aranca. Where that comes into play is with the air flowing over the wing. So here's the wing, and so as the air comes along here, and the air goes here, it speeds up. This air maintains its normal speed. So the pressure down here is what? Up or down? Pressure is up here, right? Because when it slows down compared to this, when the air speeds up, the pressure goes down, right? So pressure is lower here. And so you have a two component of lift, a double component of lift. The pressure here is higher, component of lift here, because the pressure is lower. So you have, by the air flowing over wing planform, it's called planform, by the wind flowing over it, you're getting lift from two sources around that wing. Now, there are going to be other sources that people are going to talk about, where if you start tilting the nose of the airplane up, you're going to be doing this, where you have a wind this way. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's called relative wind. Okay, let's continue on here. So now we're talking about airfoils. And an airfoil is the shape of a wing or the fuselage. This is an airfoil here. And this is the leading edge of the airfoil here, and we could actually make it a little smoother, although there are a lot of airplanes like that. Okay, so this is the leading edge here. All right. And this is called the upwash, where the air is forced up along the front edge of the airfoil. And the trailing edge is over here. And the trailing edge actually has a downwash, because you have this air speeding down the side of it, and it's going to make this air underneath go down with it also. So here's the trailing edge. And here's the downwash. It's called downwash. I don't particularly care if you use the word downwash or upwash. I don't very often use it. I don't think that too many other people use it. The only people who might use it are the people who are doing research in the area of airfoils. So downwash and upwash, that's not something you want to necessarily remember. I'm not going to question you on it. I'm not going to put it on a quiz. That's just a piece of information. But you need to understand the trailing edge and the leading edge, right? The leading edge is always the fatter. The trailing edge is always the thinner, because you want to force the air up and over that airfoil, that wing. Okay, here's some notations. Camber means the shape, the curved shape of the wing. This whole part right here is called camber. It's saying that this is the shape of the wing, the curved shape of the wing. Camber. And there are many different types of wing camber. There are narrow ones, there are big fat ones, there are middle ones, and on an airplane none of you have ever heard of called the F-104 Starfighter, that wing was so flat and so narrow and so sharp that when they parked it on the runway at the air bases, a long time ago, they parked it on the runway, they had to put pieces of rubber on the front leading edge of the wing because it would cut people as they were walking by. It was so difficult to fly that when we sold it to the German Air Force, the Germans began killing themselves trying to learn to fly the F-104 Starfighter. And if anybody is curious, I'll just get on the internet and look it up, and you'll discover a tremendous number of fatalities in Germany as a result of the 104, and the wing itself had virtually no camber. It was like a flat piece of metal. How did it fly? Brute force. That engine, it was a single engine, and it was like sitting on a rocket. The pilot was sitting there on this huge engine, and he had all the power in the world, so he literally forced the Starfighter into the air. It lasted a few years, I don't recall, but was not a hugely successful aircraft, but it sure could beat anybody in terms of top speed. Okay. The chord now is important because the chord has a lot to do whether or not the aircraft is going straight or going to stall. The chord is from the very tip of the leading edge, a straight line, all the way to the back. So, but you get the idea. I mean, it's a straight line from the leading edge to the trailing edge. And the chord idea is important because it has to do later on with some terminology that you're going to be using. Okay. See that right away. Here we are between the angle between the chord and the relative wind. When I say relative wind, it means it's opposite the path that the airplane is flying through the air. So, if an airplane if an airplane is, let me see if I can draw an airplane, right? Okay, if an airplane is diving down, right, even though the ambient air, or even though it's the ambient air, let's say the TV reports that the airspeed is 10 miles an hour over the Central Valley, that's this. That's the ambient air. Don't have to worry about writing that down. I'm not going to question that. The relative wind, though, is exactly opposite. This is the relative wind. And it's always opposite the path of the airplane. And it's very, very important because when that angle of attack gets to a certain point called the critical angle of attack, what happens to the airplane? It stalls. The airplane stalls. It literally falls out of the sky. And there's a question on the private exam for pilots, which probably none of you are going to be taking. I don't know whether you have that interest or not. But if you wind up taking the private pilot exam for your license, there's a question on there that says, and it asks the question, yes or no, can an airplane stall in any attitude at any airspeed? And the answer is yes. And I'll tell you why. Because no matter what happens, the wing of the airplane and the for a stall for the angle of attack. Here's when they figured it out. Back just before World War II, the fighter pilots were given targets on the ground. And they were told to try to bomb those targets. And they said, you have to be really accurate about it. So the target, the bomb would go exactly where they put it, and it would pull out. Pulling out, not too fast. They changed. And now, instead of, let me see if I can, continuing down through the relative wind, they tilted the airplane to the point where it was like that. Even though it was going down this way, it had the nose pointed here because the pilot was trying to pull back on it to come out of the dive, and he pulled out too fast, and it stalled right into the ground. And they pilots like crazy until they finally discovered that maybe the reason was they were changing the angle of attack. They were changing the critical angle of attack. And it's the angle between the wing chord line, which is the wing chord line, and the relative wind. So as soon as they started pulling out, if they pulled out too fast, the airplane would continue to go down this way, and boom, it would wind up in the target with the bomb. So the important thing about that is that what you have to do is have to keep in mind that the angle of attack is not only critical, but it's also a design feature. That might be a question on the exam, right? It's a design feature. That means that every wing has its own critical angle of attack. And it never changes. That means that an aircraft with a particular wing is going to stall at the same angle of attack every single time regardless. It doesn't change. It's built into the airplane. It's built into the way the wing is attached to the fuselage. I've just mentioned this a couple times where the relative wind is opposite the flight path. It's never the ambient wind. If you stick your hand out, wind, you're going down the street, the relative wind, the wind is coming to you from the side. The wind that's coming in. Okay. One of the things that I do a lot is I teach students to stall an airplane. And I teach them to stall not because I want them to get excited about how it happens, but I want them to understand how to get out of it. And even though we teach stalls at 3,500 feet or more, The real issue is if you're coming in for a landing and you're only 100 feet above the runway and you happen to stall the airplane, you've got to be able to get out of that stall quickly. Now remember I told you this dive bomber is coming down and he pulled back on the stick too hard and he stalled it? Okay, so now let's say you're at 6,000 feet and we do the same thing. We pull the stick back and now we're stalled. How do you get out of the stall? Let go of the stick. A stall cannot occur unless you have got that stick back to the point where you have now increased the angle of attack based on the relative wind to its critical angle of attack. And the only way that can happen is by pulling back on the stick or by the wheel. If you're flying an airplane, it's got a wheel, that same thing, stick or wheel. So the angle of attack can be exceeded only, the stall can be released only if you get rid of that pressure that you're holding the stick back. All you have to do is really just let it go. I had a young lady who I was teaching to fly gliders, and she was bothered by stalls, and understandably, because, you know, when you get up at a stall, now the airplane stops flying and the nose wants to go down. Airplanes are smart. You know, they know how to recover by themselves. So I would say, okay, Elizabeth, let's go do a stall. So you go up, stall, scream, and recover. That was the way I got her to the point where she started laughing at herself because she used to scream every time the airplane stalled. So I said, okay, here's the procedure. Up, stall, scream, and recover. And sure enough, she would go up, stall, scream, and recover, and she did it a few times, and then pretty soon she didn't scream anymore. What's interesting is that if you are at high enough altitude and you stall an airplane, and you just sit there with your hands folded like this, that airplane is going to recover on its own, completely on its own. Now, it might eat up a lot of altitude doing it. It might eat up a couple thousand feet, but that's okay at altitude. Again, we practice stalls not because we're going to stall it at altitude. You almost in your entire lifetime, the only reason you would stall it at altitude was because of practicing. We practice recovery rapid in case we're 100 feet above the ground. So, an airplane stalls because it exceeds the critical angle of attack. And that's the pure definition of a stall. There are no other definitions for you to worry about. If I asked you on a quiz, what is the definition of a stall? You will tell me it is the airplane has increased the angle of attack beyond the critical angle of attack. Or it has exceeded the design angle between the chord and the relative wind. There are a number of ways you can describe a stall. Stall simply means that the airplane isn't going to fly anymore. Let's take a look at that for a minute. Okay? So here's the relative wind. What happens is the air flows like this, and instead of smoothing and creating lift, the more angle of attack is called alpha. Does anybody know what alpha means? Okay, so the angle, the air, instead of flowing smoothly, it starts to bounce. And it starts bouncing back here, but the more you pull up the nose of the aircraft, that bouncing, and as soon as it gets to a certain point in the air, the airplane just falls, the airplane falls, it stalls. There's no longer lift created because of all this turbulence going on right here. And one of the things we used to do is we used to put little tufts of yarn on the wing, a whole bunch of them in a big row, and then we'd go out and we'd stall the airplane and we'd start pulling it up, and you could see those tufts. As the farther back ones would start, the tufts would start doing this first, and then you'd see, so pretty soon the tufts would start wiggling near the front of the wing, and then pretty soon the airplane would stall. Again, get out of a stall. If you've got enough altitude, just let go of everything. Okay, we talked about that before. The critical angle of attack is the design of the wing. The design of the wing. Don't worry about coefficient of lift. I'm not going to ask it. I'm just going to tell you about it. Coefficient of lift is what happens when the wing, the angle of attack keeps increasing and increasing. The lift goes up and up and up. You get more and more and more lift until at a certain point, which is the design angle, the critical angle of attack, it stalls. But up to that point in time, the coefficient of lift demonstrates that you can get higher and higher and higher lift until the aircraft stalls, until the wing finally gives up its nice smooth flow. Okay, so we know one way to increase lift. I just told you about it, right? One way is to increase the angle of attack. What's the other way? Okay, we change the angle of attack, right? Increase it, not decrease it. You want to increase the angle of attack. That's one way to increase the lift. What's another way? Anybody know? How about speed? Increase speed, right? If the air is flowing over the wing faster and faster, the lift is stronger and stronger. And the lift is a square of the function of the velocity, right? So the airspeed, squared is equal to lift. And by the way, so we'll go to change airspeed. That's another one. You increase the airspeed, you increase the lift. Yes, you increase the drag, but you also increase the lift. And the third way ought to be pretty obvious, right? What is it? Do both. Right? Change the angle of attack and the airspeed. And you can increase the lift that way. Okay, brief talk here briefly, as I say, because the subject is a little heavy and it gets into more complex mechanisms than I want to cover here. But on an airplane, maybe you've heard that there are flaps on an airplane, right? Okay. So, a flap on a wing fools the air that the camber is bigger than it is. So if you have a wing, like that, don't get into it. All kinds of. A flap is hinged right here, hinged, and this is the way the camber looks as far as the air is concerned. The minute you put this down, right, now the air thinks that it's much bigger. You never see a commercial airliner land anywhere without its flaps down, way down, because it's making the wing fatter and it's making it get more lift. Even though it's fooling the air into thinking that's how thick the wing is, the fact is that you will never see that happen, never, because they can't slow down enough without flaps to generate the kind of lift that's necessary. So this is kind of a funny way, right, to increase lift, attack, but on a commercial airliner, they have to do it with flaps, and then they increase the angle of attack. So high lift devices, it's not worth getting into right now, I'd much rather have you concentrate on the basics of flight and the basics of the four forces of flight. But I just want you to know flaps are an important part of almost any aircraft. Some of the earlier ones didn't have flaps. Some of the gliders we fly don't have flaps. But the majority of aircraft in the world today have big, complex flaps that do really amazing things. Right, there are a variety of flaps. We just talked about that. Now we're going to get into drag. I want to write this one down because there are two basic types of drag. The first type is parasite. And think about parasite. What's a parasite? Something that hangs on something else, right? Like an animal that hangs onto a whale, that's a parasite. Birds that peck off the back of a rhinoceros, that's a parasite. So a parasite is something that's sort of hanging on. So the shape of an aircraft, the parasite would be something as simple as rivets on a wing. If the rivets are exposed, that is, the top of the rivet is shown above the aluminum itself, that's a parasite. Now, it may not be a lot of parasite, but if you want an airplane to go a lot faster, you would have countersunk the rivets so that the head of the rivet is not sticking up over the aluminum. It's now sunk down and it's even with the aluminum. That's one parasite. The other parasite would be struts. Struts that hold up a wing. Those are parasites that create drag. Anything that is not really smooth and aerodynamic on an airplane is considered parasite drag. And parasite drag is important to know that it increases with speed. It increases with speed. The more you speed up, the more the parasite drag has an effect on the airplane. And the only other form of drag is induced. The pilot makes it happen. He induces drag by, among other things, slowing down and raising the nose of the airplane so that it's flying against a lot more wind. Right? So if the airplane's flying along straight and level, if you look at it head on, it's just a fuselage. But the minute he starts slowing down, he's tipping up the nose. Now you see the underside of the aircraft. Now the wind is hitting the underside of the aircraft as well as going over the wing. The pilot has induced drag. Those are the only two kinds, ever and ever, forever. All you have to do is remember those two. I guarantee you they'll be on a quiz. Parasite induced, because they're so important. All right. Total drag is a really good concept because designers use a graph all the time for deciding how much and what to do with. So you've got a graph like this, right? And so this is a drag here. This is increasing drag, and this is increasing airspeed. And I might ask you about this because it's important. All right. So induced drag is high because you slow down. Right? It's a speed. Now you've slowed down, and the way you've slowed down is that you've raised the nose to the point where the airplane is going slow, but there's a lot of induced drag. So it's up here, and it comes down like this. So the faster you go, the induced drag goes away because you don't induce anything anymore. You tilt the nose down, level, and now you're flying through the air perfectly level, and the actual induced drag is almost zero. Maybe it's 5%. I don't know. Something like that. Parasite drag, on the other hand, I just explained to you, parasite drag means that the faster you go, the worse the drag, because those things that are hanging on the airplane don't go away. They're still there, and they're causing more problems, more drag. So, it's like this. Yeah. So this is induced, and this is parasite. Okay, and then the total drag is the sum of those two, right? So if there's here, and if you sum this twice, it's here, and if you sum this one, it's something like this. Yeah, so total drag. Total drag is important because the aircraft will fly the most efficiently here. A glider will fly the most efficiently here at the point of minimal total drag. And it's a combination of induced and parasite. This concept is important for all phases of aviation, for flying, for design of a wing, for design of an aircraft in general. It's an important concept. You really need to keep in mind that induced and parasite and total drag is so important that it's something that if you're ever going to be in the aviation industry, you always want to keep in the back of your mind. Okay, we're getting ready to go here. So I need to have you take these, I need to have you fill these out and return them by Thursday. That was that young lady that came just minutes ago. She wants these filled out. I'm going to call her and make sure that that you don't have to have the transcript. It says a transcript, but I don't think that's necessary. More important, just put your name and high school and grade level. Don't worry about college ID. That will be given to you later. Oh, there you go, Martine. Now, you can turn it in sooner if you want to. I don't care. So later than Thursday, huh? Wednesday or Thursday night. Yeah. Pardon? Oh, I don't know. I have no idea. But I would not try to steal it out of there if I were you.